Hi, everyone. Welcome to the new episode of AI Makers Unpacked series. AI Makers Unpacked series is a new initiative by 3i, which is India's largest platform for AI analytics leaders, aspirants, and professionals. And what we do in this series is actually an attempt to cover 150 AI analytics leaders, what we have showcased last year in terms of AI Makers 150 list. Now, the whole intent of this particular series is to cover, unravel, uh, all, I would say, the aspects of professional journey of the AI analytics leaders. Now, there is a great hidden, what I call a treasure trove when it comes to AI analytics leaders, and seldom it's been actually unraveled. And our attempt through this particular set of series is to actually unravel the professional attributes, journey, anecdotes, nuggets of, I would say, experience, what each one of these AI analytics leaders carry. Now, for this particular series, we've got a very special guest, and he's joining from US, Pramod Singh. Not only I know him from last, I would say, several years, but he's a dear friend. And Pramod Singh is the Chief Analytics Officer at InvestNet Yodlee. And first of all, he's a very seasoned and a very proven and a progressive leader in the AI analytics arena. If you actually kind of Google Pramod Singh, you'll find him in the top league across the global AI analytics leader. Now, in his, I would say, long and very sustainable and progressive career, Pramod Singh has worked at HP and at Walmart as well, and he has done stints in India as well as in US. But for this particular session, he's joining from US. Welcome, Pramod.
Thank you, Sameer, and thanks for the opportunity to chat. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Now, Pramod, one of the things I want to touch upon, and this is to start with, and this is for the uninitiated. Uh, Tell us about your professional journey. I mean, you've covered a very long kind of set of innings, and there are multiple, I would say, aspects which are still to be unraveled. Give us some sense about your professional journey, how you started your career in AI analytics, and I'm sure the nomenclatures have changed over the years, and how you've traversed in terms of what currently you do at InvestNet Utility.
So thanks, Sameer. Right, I think I have a little bit of a non-traditional background, like in terms of my professional journey, and even before that, for my personal journey, I think I've been kind of a world citizen. I was born in US, had my early education in India, and then I had come back to US for my graduate program, right? And I started, in fact, a somewhat of what I say literally accidental journey, in the sense that while I was on my PhD program, in fact, few weeks before my PhD qualifiers, I had an opportunity to go, and I was doing my PhD at University of Arkansas, and Walmart's headquarters was just 20 miles up the road, right? And somebody, I think, accidentally made my resume, gave it to Walmart. Walmart called me in their information systems. They thought, oh, this guy is getting a PhD in mathematics, must be very smart. I didn't know much about information systems at that point of time. But a long story short, I talked to them, and they made me an offer, and I took it, and basically continued my PhD while I was working there. But more importantly, what happened, I got into a space at that point of time. Walmart was trying to go optimize their assortment, right? Even in 96, 97 time frame, Walmart had thousands of stores, but every store in the country looked exactly the same. Whether you are a store in, say, El Paso, Texas, or your store in New Hampshire, or you're in California, the assortment kept was exactly the same. And what they felt that, that's suboptimal, right? Because they are different ethnic behavior, they are different, climate behaviors. And there was a company from California at that time who had come in and proposed what we called at that time data mining, right? So they had this stuff, clustering algorithms, neural networks, decision trees. And they had come in and gotten a contract with Walmart, and Walmart wanted one of their employees to go work and lead on that. And that was, I think, for me, what we typically call the drinking from the fire hose in some sense, right? Lot of learning, lot of hypothesis testing, but more importantly, what we realized and did was that we decided that we'll use some analytical driven decision making, right? And so every store, the stores, the Walmart stores can be of different sizes, right? I mean,
Right.
they I mean, they are super centers or just pure Walmarts, even at that point of time. And even the pure Walmarts could have, sizes which are, with different assortments, right? But the idea there was, can you go take a category like shampoo and conditioners, right? A typical retailer like Walmart can have 700, even at that point of time, 700 to 800 different SKUs that can go there as a candidate. But on a shelf, I mean, you don't want to put more than 30, 40, 50 SKUs, right? So how do you decide which one to put, how much of that to put, what the performance of that would be? And in different stores in the country, I mean, you want to go have a different assortment, right? So we ended up, I think, using, I mean, after a lot of trial clustering algorithms, uh, to look at the selling patterns of these SKUs, by store and cluster the stores, right? Uh, and what, so basically, you may have a store, say, in New Hampshire, or a store in uh, um, Wisconsin, which may have a similar selling patterns, right? And you will send the same assortment to them
Right.
through those, right? But to do that, I think that one of the lessons there was, so we created those things. We worked with some of the vendors at that point of time, but more importantly, we wanted to make sure we can do a real testing, right? So we picked some pilot stores, some control stores, changed the assortments, checked, worked on, testing them, whether we had a term called turn in the retail part, where how fast are you selling those SKUs, right? And end of the day, I think we were very successful trialing it on 5 different categories. um, and then what we decided was, with the management, encouragement, we ended up rolling out this assortment planning system for all our four stores within
Wonderful.
less than a year time period, right? So, humongous learning there, taking, I mean, at very early point of time, data science, and making it part of a core running of the biggest retailer at that point of time, right? So that was my kind of, very early initiation into the data science ecosystem, right?
Right.
Learned a lot. I mean, um, and from there, I think I went to Austin, Texas, to work for Compaq, and which was quickly acquired by HP, right? So I worked at a advanced data mining center at that point of time. Uh, but 2001 2 time frame had a lot of opportunities to work in the early stages of e-commerce analytics, right? So I mean, in some sense, I think the very early stages of what we call clickstream analytics now, through companies like Omniture, and working with them, optimize the HP's online store, right? Their SMB store, their B2B store called ePrime at that point of time. So very tremendous learning, working with the latest technology at that point of time. More importantly, the e-commerce part, after the, I think, um, the the 2000 bubble that burst, right?
Hmm.
A lot of journey there. I moved from there within HP to an organization called Customer Knowledge Management, right? Which was where a lot of, I think, things around taking analytics, building customer profiles, integrating that as part of the CRM, integrating that part of the marketing solutions, right? And then in 2006-7 timeframe, I had an opportunity at that the leadership at Walmart, their CIO Randy Mott came to HP, and he had seen what the work we had done, and I came back to IT part of it, to lead the analytics platform for HP, right? And we did a lot of work around consolidation of our analytical tool. More importantly, creating a platform where the bigger analytical solutions can be deployed, right? And in that process, I think we ended up, bringing in lot of incremental revenues. I mean, maybe later I'll talk about a solution in the marketing space, where we built out a marketing program for the SMB, for North America, which brought in $150 million of incremental revenue. But more importantly, it gave us a platform of, looking at our data scientists across the world, putting them onto one platform, building these solutions that can be deployed, right? And during that journey, I think there was a bit of a growth on the India side, right? I mean, this is at the time frame when HP created a analytics center in India. That team grew to about 1,000+ plus people, right? In that time period, right? And I had an opportunity, in some sense, to I was given an opportunity to go come to India. And before that point of time, I had never worked in India, right? To
Hmm.
go lead a team into digital and the big data analytics part, right? This is around 2012 time frame, right? And I took that opportunity, came to Bangalore. In fact, I mean, before that, as I said, I never worked here. Uh, Tremendous experience, right? I mean, a lot of different uh, cultural changes, right? But got a very high performing team. A lot of a lot of employees. Really high energy, high performing teams. Ended up, working very closely there, building out the big data, the big data analytics team, which was more than 100-member team at that point of time. Ended up, creating a lot of solutions. Co-presenting to our customers, along with our CEO at that point of time, with HP, right? Tremendous journey and a lot of learning opportunities for me, both
Right.
culturally, both as a manager and a very different managerial styles, right? And then in 2015, while I was in Bangalore, I was exposed to, and HP was sort of going through a split, in their business group.
Correct.
Got an opportunity to talk to the leadership team of, at that time, a fintech called Yodlee, right? Which was based, in Bangalore. They were sitting on a treasure of data, and the opportunity was to kind of build out the detailed ecosystems around data sciences and analytics to go monetize that data, right? So took that opportunity, over the time period, build out what we call the analytics center of excellence, which has the teams across our data scientists, engineers, and business analysts. And and within about 3 to 4 years, I think, I mean, we built up a business unit which is as big, and now bigger than our mothership itself, right? So
Awesome.
tremendous journey, starting with maybe a couple of people, in the team, to grow to a team which is now 180-member plus team, both in Bangalore and now in Raleigh. And this team, as you know, has been recognized as a top data science team to work in India for last multiple years, right? Um, and I had an opportunity then to come back to the headquarters in California, in 2018. That sort of coincided with my daughter going to college. Um, and now, over the last couple of years, I have now moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where we are kind of setting up our engineering, data sciences, and the product capabilities, right? So
Impressive.
that's my quick journey, right, over the time
No,
period, right?
absolutely. Very impressive because what you really articulated well, Pramod, was this whole cross industry kind of an experience you gained over the years, whether it was retail to, I would say, a B2B or D2C or e-commerce kind of a environment to a fintech or I would say financial services. And this leads to my other question with you because you've seen a 2+ decades kind of this evolution of analytics, AI, data science. Uh, and some of the industries over there, as you're aware, had a first mover advantage: banking, retail, CPG, and some of the industry followed that suite in terms of coming later, but also then accelerating fast. In your opinion, how some of these industries have accelerated their AI analytics adoption? Do you see some industries catching fast, some are lagging behind, or you see every industry agnostic kind of a, let's say, environment is happening when it comes to adoption of analytics AI?
Very good question, Sameer, right? I mean, and I think I can give you some examples in terms of the adoption part of it. Uh, a lot of times, I mean, yeah, you have a point of view around a particular industry, right? Adopting AI, right? So I'll give an example at Walmart at very early days.
Hmm.
A company based out of Arkansas, but what I saw, that that the desire to take risk, right? Having the first mover advantage was, I mean, huge there, right? The example I talked about, that apartment planning system, right? Where, I mean, at that point of time, this was unheard of, right? I mean, called data mining, neural networks, and research, and the clustering algorithms, right? But when we showed the results for, a couple of categories across, 10 to 15 stores, and from there going to thousands of stores. So I had a conversation with the senior leadership at that point of time. I was presenting these results, the to the head of assortment planning, at that point of time. This is more than 20 years ago now, right? And we are professionals in the analytics space. We have built models, and we talk about models accuracy around 70% accurate, 65% accurate, depending on it, and comparatively young, right? And when I was talking to them, I was very young, right? And I said, I mean, this has worked in these categories very well. And
Right.
then I was told by the leader that, hey, let's go ahead and deploy it. And I was very worried, right? And he said, look, if we have, if you are 70% confident that this thing will work, and it will take our competitors, at least 6 to months to a year to catch up, I would rather go take that chance, right?
Hmm.
So the reason I'm giving that example is this, even at that point of time, was the world's biggest retail company, right? But ability and desire to take even somewhat of a calculated risk to have the first mover advantage in that industry was huge there, right? So it's also cultural a little bit within an industry segment, right? So retail, I have already seen, very early segues of analytics, but
Hmm.
even now, 20 years later, I mean, you will see a mixed bag, right? I mean, there's some companies which have done very well. I mean, a lot of these things have gone across multiple different aspects of even running a retail, everything from assortment planning to marketing to sales. Workforce planning is a big thing there, right? Because the hourly employees, how do you best go balance those? There are solutions in that
And
space,
one of
right?
the things, Pramod, I'm sorry, I'm chiming in, which I also want you to emphasize upon is that business tangibility part, because there's often, this conundrum, hey, you're doing engagements, POCs, projects in analytics AI. In your own experience, how have you seen this business impact, output, or tangibility coming out kind of a thing from an industry viewpoint in a generic manner?
Very good question, Sameer, right? And you are right. I think, I mean, what you cannot measure, you cannot influence. I mean, that's one thing,
Absolutely.
right? And I think it's very important that as you start to get into, taking analytics and data sciences and deploying them, I mean, and I typically say that all the time, that let's define the rules of the game before we start playing the game, right? In other words, that defining what the success KPIs are very important, right? I mean, if you're doing it, I mean, example I had given earlier, assortment planning system, define what success means. Success means, in an online setting, it would be the click through rates, or in a typical physical store, it's the turns that you are doing, the sales that you are increasing. But it's very important to define the success KPIs early, and make sure putting a mechanism in place that you can track it, right? And can see the impact, right? It's okay to iterate through that, right? It's okay to iterate through that, right? But if you kind of go, I mean, if you go without defining your success KPIs, I think you can go anywhere and claim victory, or otherwise, right?
Correct.
So that part, I think I've seen that, where I have seen the things which have become a POC and remained a POC versus going to production, that has been one of the key success criteria that I have seen, right? I also can recall my incident at HP, when we were kind of an ecosystem of an analytics platform within the global business intelligence, uh, and we will get a lot of requests from the business side, right? A lot of projects, and everybody will claim that the project will have humongous impact.
Right.
So what a sort of a process that we put together as this project request will come in, which needed, data sciences and analytics, we will we will ask the business about, assuming this is delivered, what kind of impact it will bring in, right? For the sales team, I think, in fact, if they say this is an incremental 50 million revenue, um, it was a formal process to increase their quota by 50 million, right? In this example, right? For example. So what happens is then there's skin in the game on both sides, right?
Correct.
If we do not deliver, we are potentially negatively impacting the revenue, right? But if this does get delivered, there's a responsibility on the other end, right? Because the quotas directly relate to your compensation and everything else like that, right? So putting an accountability on both sides become very important, right? And then there should be a very clear mechanism. How do you measure what the success is, right?
Right.
I have seen this across, retail, high tech, and now in fintech. I mean, this stays true all the time, right?
Got it. Now, shifting gears, and This is something which is very topical, Pramod. We know across the globe there is a war for talent. Talent is in deficit, specifically the technology talent. And when it comes to analytics, AI, data science, it's further getting very, very, I would say, it's an arduous task actually to hire right set of people. Now, you've led large team. You've kind of, let's say, had many leaders kind of working with you on the analytics, AI, data science. And I want you to compare what used to exist, let's say 10 years back, in terms of skills, competencies of AI analytics, data science, versus what exists today. So when you are picking up, let's say, entry level or even mid level kind of profiles or senior level in analytics AI, what has changed over the years? I mean, give us some sense around this whole talent, I would say, scenario, please.
Very good question, right? And I can see the journey, and especially I can even talk about a little bit around the two countries I have worked in,
Sure.
right? If I kind of look back, 20 years later, and again, this term now, what we call analytics and AI and data science, and in between we call it advanced analytics. As I said, late 90s,
Big
it was
data and all kind of a thing. Yeah.
big big data analytics and everything in between. And as I said, I mean, in late 90s, the data mining was a term, right? Very restricted, but few Bay Area companies and places, right? But I think the evolution, if you look through that and where the professionals came in, where the journey started, in the early part, I think there will be. I mean, if you just take a step back and kind of from an educational perspective, where would the folks come from, right?
Hmm.
So one class is the classical computer science people coming in, who had some sort of a background, into mathematics or statistics part of it. Typical programmers trying to evolve into that, right? And so we have seen some of that. But an early part of where our, data science uh, came in the pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, a lot of clinical trials being running. A lot of my colleagues from the graduate school, from statistics program, will go work in that space. A lot of statisticians started to come into the industry, right? Working through this part of it. Then I've started seeing the evolution of that, MBA programs, which were more quants in nature, and you will see some of that, right? But and even in terms of tools, the early part of it, 20 years ago, there were, I mean, companies like, SAS and SPSS, right? And almost everything was proprietary. I mean, they started from college, right? Colleges will be using SAS. These guys will continue to use SAS, and probably a lot of them will retire with SAS and not trying different things, right?
Right.
Yes. So what changed, I think, dramatically, I would say about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I mean, coming to age of the open source part of it, right? And if you guys recall, I think, if you recall, when R came to the thing, right? Now this is open source, right? And and since then, I think, I mean, the whole floodgates have opened now, right? I mean, we completely run off an open source stack now, right? What that did was that really democratized the talent pool in some sense, right?
True.
You want to go contribute to the state of art, and you are I think a professor or a graduate student or an engineer in New Zealand, you can go write that feature and it becomes part of the open source, as compared to a company which will look for 7 8 prospects who may ask for that feature, and then they will get their data scientists, engineers to go work on it, deploy that, and try to monetize that, right? So the exponential growth of the tools and the techniques and the algorithms that we had in that time period, and even now, completely changed the ball game. Completely changed the ball game for us, right? I mean, now I think, I mean, you can have people in India, or I mean, Europe, or New Zealand or Australia, or, I mean, of course, in US, right? Who can be part of it, right? So from a very scarce resource pool, I think we have now a pool of people, I mean, which is much bigger. I mean, a lot of people are getting exposed to these, I mean, these tools, in their college time frame, right? But along with that, the demand exponentially grew, right? So the gap, I mean, right now is probably even bigger than what we started out with. But I do want to put a perspective there, that why I think, I mean, if I look at the quantum of data science happening across the industries, right? Is thousands of times more than what it was in 2009, 2010 frame, right?
Correct.
Part of that journey also is, which we may not think intuitively, is because the compute and the storage got so cheap. So some of the problems that we are solving right now, It's not that the techniques did not exist. It doesn't mean that, I mean, people knew about k-means clustering 30, 40 years ago, right? Or decision trees, or even neural networks now that has evolved into the deep learning space. A lot of these things were known, right? But the business use cases, uh, um, the outcome of that did not, substantiate the investment you do in terms of storage and compute, right? But with
Hmm.
the cloud coming in, right? Even a small company, I mean, at one point of time, like Yodlee, right? Can still do a huge amount of compute that could have taken tens of millions of dollars in your own data center. But on cloud, you can do that, right? So that opened up the floodgates, right? So if you have a business problem, that brings you $100 million, sorry, $100,000 of benefit. But if your compute is $150,000, you won't do that, right? But
True.
now
True.
that compute you can do for $5,000 and still make it a profitable thing, right?
No,
So
so
that,
within that, and that's a good point what you said about this whole change in the quantum computing and the power, storage power going up and all. Specifically coming to academics, I know you have a very keen interest and you've been attached with many of the academic institutions in the past and current as well. Now, there is always what I say a very divergent views across, which has been existing for quite some time about this industry academia not being joined to the hip.
Mhm.
Having said that, from a lens of analytics, AI, data science,
Mhm.
what, in your own view, should be done to enhance this particular stream or this particular kind of, let's say, segment of analytics AI from academic level? Do you suggest any changes in terms of what should happen just to ensure that there is a less kind of a, let's say, uh, I would say, issue for the companies to hire, or you believe it's fine as of now and maybe require some tweaks? So give us some views around that, Pramod.
Good point, right? I mean, I see things definitely getting better, right?
Hmm.
You're right. I mean, from a student graduating either with a graduate program or a bachelor's degree, and being a proficient, I mean, or a productive data scientist, or an analyst, into a company, we had seen the gaps, right, in the past,
Right.
right? And this where I think a lot of, I think both in US and in India, I think I had multiple kind of sessions, with the universities, right? And what I think I really want to talk about is making sure that that friction point that you have after you graduate and becoming what I call quote unquote a productive data scientist, right? In terms of the tools, the exposure to the classes of problems, right? Is very important, right? So what I'm seeing now that a lot of educational institutes are getting, taking things like Python, right? I mean, that's becoming mainstream that people are coding in that, right? And if that's classes of things that you're working at work, that's okay, right? It I still believe it will be very important, and for the educational institutions, right? To kind of get cloud exposure to their students, right? Making sure they can do projects on I mean public cloud, right? Whether it's Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, or any such thing. Having them being proficient and comfortable there definitely will ease the journey, right? Um, Making sure the rigors of the classical data science is taught
Hmm.
well. I mean, uh, this is where the grounding happens, right? So not just taking a tool and taking a drop down and saying, okay, I'm going to pick this algorithm versus that algorithm. Making sure that they have a good grounding into why and where these classes of algorithms could be used, right? More exposure to the real data, the real world classes of problems, right? And this is where I'm a very big proponent of internships, right? And
Yeah.
we do
Yeah.
that on both the countries. Even in India, I think we have very strong internship programs, right? But not only it does two things, right? It exposes your students to the real world problems. More importantly, when they go back to college, they talk to their colleagues about that, right? I mean, so to me, it's also a very very strong brand building for the organization, right? Because you're
True.
trying to hire the best talent. If they have come and experienced and worked with you, as part of a strong COE, right? I think they go talk to their colleagues and you build your brand, right? In terms of doing that, right? But very important, I still believe, and I think it's definitely better than it was 4 5 years ago, right? That the students coming out are, I mean, there's not a whole lot of gap. I mean, from the top institutes, right? I'm talking about, the Indian top institutes or the institutes in US here, right? But I'm also seeing lots and lots of programs across the world where they're trying to reskill people, right? I mean, there's several here in US, several in India, where
Right.
um, they say some of these are kind of non-traditional programs that the working professionals will work on the evening part of it, and those become a little bit more important, a little bit more different, right? Because now you have a working professional may have a 8, 5, 10 year career in a different field, wants to go transition into an analytics program, right? So what I just talked about, the exposure to the real world data science problems becomes even more important there, right?
Got it.
But I'm a big proponent of that. The depth is important, right? And at some point of time in your career, you got to go pick that, right? If you want to be professional,
And I think
yes.
that's a good point. What you said, this depth and being comprehensive, holistic in terms of learning, is important. And you rightly said that uh, outside of the tier one institute, I think there is a scope for improvement for tier two, tier three colleges to up the ante on the analytics AI learning side. So that's a good point. One more shift of the gears, Pramod, and you've been a global AI analytics data science leader, and you've managed teams across geographies. Now, in your own experience, how have you coped up with the nuances of the culture, geography change, expectations, stakeholder management? And this is more from, I would say, taking a cue for our, I would say, viewers and a lot of, I would say, leaders and aspirants who will watch this particular episode. What's been your learning around this scenario?
Yeah. Very, very good question, Samir, and I'll take a second to kind of reflect back on that, right? Um, and you are right. I mean, even in different parts of United States, I mean, culturally it's different, right? I mean, like
True.
even
And
things
it's chalk
around.
and cheese in many of the
Yeah,
geographies, as you know.
yes, yes, and I mean, and across the board, right? I mean, we all work in the same part of the domain, but even things like that the time people come to office is very different than Bay Area versus what you see on the East Coast, right? Or in South where I work quite a bit, right? I mean, even the dress code and things like that, the management styles, right? And different than India, right? Uh, what is important, especially in the analytics ecosystem, right? Unlike classical technical teams, where I think which are more homogeneous in nature, right?
Right.
And that is part of ecosystem. People are coming from different backgrounds, right? Um, the stakeholder management becomes very different, right? So maybe let me take the US part first, and then I'll talk about and differentiate that with India, right? Uh, I mean, what I felt in early part of my career that the US, I think the management was comparatively low touch, right? In some sense, right? Once you have sort of defined the problems, the teams work together with that. The HR interventions are comparatively lower, right? When I came to India, I think in 2012, I realized, and for all the right reasons, because these were fast-growing teams, team sizes were bigger. They are a little bit more formal interventions, coming from the HR part of it. I did realize a lot more high-touch management,
Hmm.
and you get exposed to a lot of people who are, I mean, and you get the full spectrum, right? But there are some people who are really, really, really smart, right? And you want to make sure that you can differentiate them, put them in the right spotlight, give them the right opportunities. Especially, I mean, my experience in the 5, 6 years in India were, I mean, working for a global company from an India center, right? To
Right.
your point, so the stakeholder management becomes even more important because your stakeholders are primarily, business leaders, I mean, which may be in a different part of the world, right? And if you're managing several of them, in a different capacity, right? The communication skills become very important, right? And
Very
I've
true.
seen a very good evolution of the employees, both the companies that I worked in India, that who have stepped up the food chain in terms of managing the core delivery and as well as the stakeholder management, right? But I definitely would say that it's a lot more high touch, at least at the point of time I was there in India. And I mean, as I said, for all the right reasons, right? Because the work, I mean, these are bigger teams. It's a comparatively younger workforce that we have, right? And I think to make sure that they are the most productive, I think you need that, right? And I have learned a lot too. I mean, honestly, I mean, it's a learning is on both sides, right? I mean, my tenure in India taught me a lot as a human, as a manager, and those learnings are definitely help make me a better person per se.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll take a few very quick, rapid fire, I would say, responses, Pramod, for you. And this is, I think, essential to, I would say, kind of get your views on some of the themes and I would say perspective. Uh, in and you have to give the responses in one sentence, please. At best, two sentence. Uh, in your view, how would AI shape up in next 5 years?
I think AI will become, in my view, become an integral part of running companies, right? Which has not been the case so far, right? So AI will be what IT is today. That's my short answer.
Oh, great, great. And in your view, if a particular aspirant who wants to get into analytics, say, data science, has to pick up one big skill, what that would be?
Depending on which side you're trying to approach, right? If you're trying to approach as a pure data science practitioner, right? And if you're talking about a tool, I will say pick up Python, for example. You need
Python.
to go code in that. If
Great.
you, of course, I have always said, again, this is more than one sentence now. The whole AI space, there are multiple career paths that you can do. Like even if you look at my teams, right? You have a strong data science part. We have people who are business analysts, but very, very critical part, right? Because they are the ones talking to the businesses, bringing things there, and there I will tell the different skill sets. And very, very, very important are our big data engineers, right? Who are taking these AI models to production, right? Without them, you will not get value, right? And there are different classes of skill set there, right? And this whole thing makes it all these what I call the three-legged stools. And you need in an organization, all these three legs to be very, very strong. And as an individual, I would say as you evolve into this new generation of AI practitioners, you need to have a bit of all these three. You will have a core competency in say data science, but you cannot just be a pure data science if you are in industry practitioner, right? You need to have business skills, right, as well as you need to have engineering skills. So I always tell my team that your titles and career path is on one of these three, but you need to have a bit of other two as well. I know it's
Awesome.
more than two sentences, but I wanted to complete the
No,
thought there.
absolutely. Very relevant. And what keeps you going, Pramod?
Since early part of my career, what keeps me going is the work me and my team is doing. I like to see a direct impact that I can draw from that work to the bottom and the top line of the company I'm working for, right? So whether it's a billions of dollars of company, impact, in companies like HP or Walmart, or millions of dollars in this case. Uh, Making sure that as an analytical professional you can draw the line, you can basically have a uh, draw the line between your work and the bottom line. That's what keeps me going, right? And I strongly encourage whatever role position that you are in, if you are not able to explain that, go talk to your boss, and make sure that you are able to kind of draw that line, and that will kind of keep you motivated all the time, right?
Great, great. I think that's a very apt summation of what you said, Pramod, because this is the beauty, I say, that when you get a seasoned leader talking and interacting, there are so many, I would say, nuggets of wisdom, experience, anecdotes, illustrations, which comes out, which makes the conversation very, very, I would say, engrossing and absorbing. And you could see from my facial expression, I was intently listening when you were saying, because there's so much to absorb in terms of the facets you touched upon in terms of different geographies. Uh, Struggling through this kind of, let's say, environment of AI analytics within the different segments, and also a whole host of what essential skills, capabilities, not only I would say the aspirant workforce needs to kind of come out with, but the existing workforce, because the kind of environment we are all living in, specifically in the area of AI analytics, data science, as you said, it's very fluid. It's absolutely very, very fragile also in terms of learning. So one has to be constantly, I would say, up on in this particular thing. But very, very absorbing discussion, Pramod, and loved that entire, I would say, session. And thank you for your time, and wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
So thank you, Sameer. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you, 3AI. I think you guys are doing a great job there, and we'll love to continue the conversation later as well. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much for your time. Really appreciate it, Pramod. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks.